The information on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered professional mental health advice. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Difficult Conversations. In our topic today, we are going to be discussing sexual assault. I've kind of gone down a rabbit hole of Muslim Reddit, and there are a lot of crazy stories on there and really sensitive stories, you name it, One story that caught my eye in particular, this girl, she said she was 19 years old and her title was I Hate My Parents. And she goes on to talk about how, she has been trying to love her parents for a long time. And she said, how Islamically, the respect that we were supposed to have for parents and stuff like that. And she goes on to say that her mom, is physically abusive to her and, all the stuff that she does. And that her dad is very distant towards her. And there was an incident that had happened to her when she was 8 years old where her cousin had sexually assaulted her. And the family basically just threw it under the rug. They almost blamed her for it. And she was saying how that when it happened, she was 8 years old. She's currently 19. And she just posted the story on there to say, what advice would you guys have for me? And she hasn't sought out therapy yet because she said it was really expensive and stuff like that. And I think that, stories like these, they're not single instances. And I know, Dhabi, in your profession, we've talked about this before and how you have clients that have gone, suffered from these situations, whether it's, a family member in some cases, whether it's the father, the grandfather, the uncle, and stuff like that. So I kind of want to dive into this issue and talk about, first of all, what sexual assault is. We can start there. And then talk about what in our community, what in our, East African community, how prevalent is this, first of all, and why is it so prevalent?
I think I want to talk about from a frame of trauma. And I think for me, probably one of those areas that as a therapist that I am much more familiar with and hear about it. And here's a lot of stories, a lot of similar stories that this girl have shared on Reddit. But the prevalent is that in Oromo community, for example, specifically, I don't think we are in that space to talk about anything else. Like in this podcast, we talk about a lot of difficult conversation in our community, the way that affects all of us. But this is also another one things that people don't talk about. And they haven't even conversation around that in a way to frame it, to talk about it, to kind of consult the victims, to create a safe space for the victims. And and then also navigating around how do you handle the perpetrators and how do you create that distance and make sure that that person is no longer in the space of any children, not just alone the person who's happened to, but any other children. And I think that conversation is not around because people intend to hesitate for many reasons. One, it can be shame, it can be guilt, it can be lack of knowledge, ignorance. It can be a nuance that we don't even understand in how to talk about sexual assault in general. And there is many ways of it. And so ways that in therapy I focus as a therapist is that I'm trauma-informed therapist. I intend to focus on that area. And when it comes to sexual assault is to make sure that each individual person who comes to my office are feeling seen.
Let's back up a little bit. From a therapy point of view or from in your profession, how would you describe sexual assault to somebody? Because I feel like, we have those words that are thrown around a lot. Sexual assault, is it the same as rape? You know what I mean? So just define it for us.
Well, sexual assault is any unwanted touch that is happening to individual, right? Anything, whether it is, any different part of body part. For a girl, it can be their chest. For boys or girls, can be private areas, or even the touch is not just to them or the person making them touch them, right? And so it needs to happen either to them and then somebody's kind of forcing that. That's the first beginning aspect of it. And then we have to talk about rape itself, right? But if we're going to talk about sexual assault, is that any unwanted touch that's happening to individual, whether it's to them and then it happened by force by somebody else making them touch them.
Yeah, and I just want to expand on that a little bit too. Is that it doesn't, and when we talk about touch, it doesn't have to be specific to the private areas, or it's any touch that is indication to a sexual behavior, right? So if someone is touching you on your back, like not necessarily your bottom, but your back, and it has a connotation that is making you feel uncomfortable, and they're doing it with that intention, that is also sexual assault, because there are times when people are like, patting someone's forearm in a way that is seductive, or that is in a way that is promiscuous, right? Like whatever. So like any part of your body, I just want to make sure that there's that clarification that just because they're not touching your bum or your private area, it doesn't mean that it's not sexual. So no, any touch onto your body, any violation onto your body,
any unwanted
any
touch,
part of part of your body, is going to be considered sexual assault. Yes.
So the other thing I want to get into is the concept of consent, right? So what does that look like? And what are like certain categories of people where even if they give the consent, it's not considered consent. You know what I'm trying to say?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna try my best. So please, everyone who's listening to this, listen to like from a place of open-minded, because I'm not an expert on this part specifically. I'm just understand the traumatic aspect of this. Consent is anything that two parties are mutually agreed to doing something together, right? It's not going to be manipulation, coercion. It's not going to be, if I do this for you, if I do that for you, then I can, you have to do that for me. It's just something that voluntarily, with somebody's state of mind, agreeing to want to participate in anything, right? That's how I would define it as, like, if you are clearly understand right now, I'm consenting to something that I'm alert, right? I'm mentally here to understand what I'm doing because I want to do it, not because I'm doing it for you, or because I want something, because I'm afraid, or because if I don't do this for you, you're not going to like me, right? That aspect of thought mindset should not even be present in that situation. It should be mostly like, hey, do you want to do this? If a person even said maybe, if they're hesitating, you should back off, right? That's how I identified it as.
Yeah, I just wanted to also kind of find the definition of like the actual dictionary definition of sexual assault, and we were pretty much on top of that, except with the addition of threat. So like the idea that if you, like the Habe said, if you don't do something for me, or if I'm threatening your safety, then that is, even though they haven't done it yet, or they haven't touched, there's not physical contact yet, the idea of the threat of bodily harm or harm to anyone else around you is also could be, if you don't provide the sexual favors or sexual contact with that person, then that could also be considered sexual assault. Yes.
So I think going back to, what I was going with that question was that it has to be clearly and freely communicated, right?
Yep.
And so in certain situations, even if the person agrees to it, you can't consider it as consent. Like if the person's underage, if they're not conscious, and if there's a power dynamic, like if you're boss to an employee or something.
Right.
So those situations, you can't consider it as consent as well.
Because there's authority difference, and there's a role difference in that sense too.
Yeah. So moving on, I think I want to touch on our community specifically. because in the wider American community, they say 1 out of every 6 American women has been a victim of attempted or completed rape. And I know rape is part, not necessarily that all sexual assault is rape.
Rape is part of sexual
yes,
assault.
but rape is a form of sexual assault. So coming back to that, I know there's no specifics in terms of East African community.
Specific data,
specific data and statistics. What do you guys think not allows or helps these situations in our community? But let's start with, do you think this is a prevalent issue for both of you?
Oh, yes. And also, I was doing a lot of research the last couple of days about why in our community there is this idea of there's the cloak of silence around this, and when there's someone speaks out about it or when someone talks about it, it's like shock, like how this happens. This doesn't happen in our. That's because there is a history in our community of this actually being sexual assault, rape, being an accepted form, and it's accepted, and it was accepted in some form for a very long time until very recent years, which is talafa. In Amharic, it's called talafa. I don't know what it's called in Oromifa. It's when they take when the guy likes a girl, he calls his brothers, he calls his friends, and then they basically carry her and take her, kidnap her. Is that what it's called? Buta?
Buta, right?
Yeah.
Buta,
So they kidnap her, they take her, and they basically keep her, and then they send the family either like an offer, like they rape her, right? So that way now she's his. And then after they rape her, they're like, okay, now we have to marry her, and the family has to agree for this girl to be married to him because this guy has already taken her virginity.
In
right?
most cases, it's like that also happens when the two can agree, but the family has said no. That can be
Yes.
an issue too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically, but because there's that history
But
of
it can be
talafa,
also used as a form of a blackmail to the family, like you said.
Yeah.
Not always, but that does happen
Yeah.
too.
yeah, but instead, so why I say that there's this there's a sense of acceptance around it is because instead of the family saying how like you just kidnapped our daughter and you raped her, and therefore there's no way in hell or high water that you're gonna marry our daughter and keep her, because the value of her virginity and the what will people say, and if she's not virgin and if she's raped, then she won't ever be able to get married. That's more important, right? So they are just like, okay, like and then that guy gets what he wants. So there's that history of it, and then in addition, when we have this idea of community and then authority that we put on age, right? So, respect your elders. Your elders could do no wrong. You can't speak against your elders. All these things. So when we have an elder, not maybe in our generation, but previous generations, right? When we have an elder doing something inappropriate to a person that's younger than them, that person, there's a power dynamic that doesn't allow the child to be heard. Right? In our community, children are just supposed to be seen, not heard. They're supposed to be quiet and there and demure. And the idea also, what is polite? What is a good child? A good child is a quiet child, a demure child. If boy or girl, that doesn't make too much of a fuss. That's not disturbing. That doesn't put the family maqa in problems, even if that's not their fault. So there's no distinction. Like if you get raped or if you went and had consensual sex, there's no distinction. Your maqa could be ruined. And there's a value in that maqa that's put on over the safety of the children at some points.
Yeah.
This is not a universal thing. This doesn't necessarily apply to every family, every parent, every Oromo person, but there's this connotation and there's this historical context that kind of sets precedence to what's happening now, right?
Yeah. I think there is that silence aspect of, like I said earlier at the beginning of the episode, is the ignorance and is fear or shame. So something that I want to address on this is that what Bonnie just brought it up is that the idea of blaming the victims and covering up for the perpetrator. I want to talk about from the trauma point of view of what that looks like to the victim, right? Because I can only speak for the victim and this experiences. One of the three things that happened to that individual. One is that the traumatic experiences of this insult itself, that is something that is harsher to recover from. The second part is that the shaming, the guilting, the embarrassment that is being put on the victim. Where are you? What are you doing?
What
are you
wearing?
wearing? All this ideology.
Yeah.
And then the third part is that the lack of community, family, trust on believing that victim that happens. So when that happens a lot in my form of the work that I do, because in that sense is that not only that now we have to work with this pain this individual have faced, now we have to work on this person trusting themselves, validating themselves, believing themselves that this actually took place, right? Because the environment around them constantly reminding them, saying, you're the liar. You're the one who made it up. You're the one who put yourself in that situation. You did not know that, you're not supposed to be in that space, right? Everybody did that to that person. They isolate that victim. And now the victim is unable to even see themselves in the community form, because one of the things that if they do speak up, where can they go? Who can they rely on? Because everybody's going to question their intention. Regardless, the one thing is that a lot of times is that it happens to kids too. They tell their parent this happened to them. Like this girl in the Reddit story, is that the parents, they don't know what to do, but they're like, that's not true. Why are you still holding on to that? You should get over it, right?
Yeah.
This happened a long time ago, right?
And I think that's where we as a community have failed, right? Because we put these people in these situations, like kids or, young girls, where when
boys too.
And boys, when people come over, we're like, oh, this is your uncle, sumaketi, and stuff like that. We expose them to these things. And when they do, when these unfortunate situations happen, we, instead of, talking to the older person and saying, hey, confronting them, we blame the victim.
Yeah.
So this is where, as a community, I feel like we failed these victims.
Yeah, and I think also one of the few things that I was picking up on when you were speaking was that, one, the child is getting re-victimized by the community, and so the perpetrator is not only violating the person's body, the child's sense of safety within their body, but then they're also taking away these essential people from them, right? And then it's also sad, and I've witnessed this working in schools and also within the community, is that sometimes the community and the family of the victim themselves put the safety and security of the perpetrator above the victim. For example, let's say, an uncle that has wife and children rapes or victimizes their nephew or their niece, right? When the parent finds out, instead of taking care of their child by believing them and prosecuting the uncle, they will say, this uncle is the provider of these children. They have a family. We can't ruin that person's life, right?
Yeah.
So
or you can't put them in the hands of,
the Adi people.
Yeah.
And all of these things. In addition, one thing I've also noticed that could be possibly unique to the diaspora children is that when they have parents that are older, they tend to think that the older parents tend to think that the children that are born here or that came here very young are just brainwashed by the Western society, that everything that they think is sexualized. So this uncle that might not be thinking to do something sexual, but the child has been so sexualized and misread it, and they've been so influenced or liberalized that they are reading into the situation, right? So that way they tend to dismiss it easily. Oh, this is the culture of Kenyati. Like, you can kissing you it's okay, but they don't understand what the uncle is doing when they're not there, right?
Yeah.
And those are the things, is that when what parents need to understand. Again, I've worked in middle schools, I've worked in high schools, and I've had multiple conversations with people that are Muslim, that are Oromo, that are Somali, that, from all walks of life, in all different, from 5th grade to 12th graders I've gotten a chance to speak with. Parents, when they do that, when they shush their child, they are teaching their child not to trust their instincts. And then also, maybe it hasn't even gotten there yet. There are kids have an innate sense of safety. So like, they know how their body feels around something that's not okay. So teaching their kids to be like, even something as benign as like, oh, this is your uncle, say hi to them, give them a hug.
Give them a hug, yeah.
And the kid, when the kid says no, there go, oh no, don't be rude, don't be balage, like, go do it. Do hug your, like, how does that sound? Like, and or kiss your uncle or kiss your aunt, or sit on their lap, or like, it's just so that kind of escalates. In addition, when it comes to the perpetrator side, right, this is something I can speak from a personal experience. Men, I can speak only to men, but men from our country, men from the East African community, there is this idea that no does not mean no.
Yeah.
No means maybe. No means yes if I just push hard enough, if I just, I'm a little bit more smoother. And maybe she just doesn't know what she wants.
Yeah.
Right? She doesn't know what she's going to get.
Yeah.
So there's this idea that I just need to keep pushing, and then eventually she'll crack. And when she cracks, she'll want me. And then that goes into that when there's that culture, right, of like of
chasing, like a chasing culture,
very unhealthy chasing, and the boundary of what that chase, where that chase ends, is specific to that individual. If that individual has morals, they stop at like a certain okay level of okay, right? And then if that person doesn't have self-control and they don't have morals, they will be like, after I rape her, well, they don't consider rape, right? After I have sex with her, then she's gonna want me.
Yeah. I mean, this whole aspect of it is very difficult conversation in many ways, and I think is something that we have to kind of constantly expand on it and talk about a different point of view. Unfortunately, this is definitely a difficult conversation for a lot of us to have, and I understand that for many people there might be afraid to have this conversation, and I'm just wondering, what would that look like as far as community? Abshiro, you were going to say something earlier. Go.
So I think, in an ideal situation, I think first off, instead of going back to our culture, we always go back to the deen, right? We always go back to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. And in situations like these where, something unfortunate has happened, every individual is responsible to, if they're able to change something with their hands, if not, you change it with your mouth. If you're not, then you hate it in your heart, but what that looks like is, when you are made aware of a situation, then you report it.
Yes.
The authorities, you report it to people that are directly involved, and not caring so much about like, what are people going to say, the kanya and stuff like that, and I know that because a community that is tight-knit like ours, we are like, namnimal nanjada and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, we have to realize who are we obligated, and who are we responsible, and who is going to do that questioning to us, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's who we are responsible to first and foremost. And I think it's such a hard situation if you do find yourself in that. But I would say definitely us having this conversation and raising awareness kind of lifts that, it takes the cover off of it.
Yeah.
you know, because a lot of people, they would rather just push it under the rug. They would rather be like, okay, that's something that's not happening in our community, and, you know, don't go on it and don't speak about it. But these things need to be spoken about, because there's people's lives that are being ruined every day.
Yeah.
You know,
And the boogeyman doesn't look like a monster. You know, it's not a stranger. It's not a random person that's going to break into your house and do these things to your children. Actually, on my drive here, I was listening to a study that was done very recently that said it was done in Europe and the United States and one other country, I can't remember. Canada, sorry. Europe, United States, and Canada. And they did a study and asked, I think it was like 42,000 men from different races, different genders, different races, different, obviously different countries and sexual orientations or whatever, and socioeconomic classes. And they asked them if 100% secrecy was guaranteed, if they would be interested in having sexual interactions with children from the ages of 8 to 14. And I think it was, I might be wrong with my statistics, about 41% said that they would do it. They would interact in I think it was 41% or something like that from the 42,000 that they was interviewed. And it might be higher actually, and I can pull it up later on and correct myself. But I think it was 41% of men that were interviewed. They said if 100% of secrecy was guaranteed, that they would get themselves involved with a child between the ages of 8 and 14.
Yeah, and this
Sexually.
is what they feed off of, is the secrecy aspect of it.
And so it's not, and then they said if there was also another like kind of a another narrower question that was asked if they already have someone in their life that they feel sexually attracted to in that age group, and then the number also was about 40% of men that said that yes, they already have a child in mind when they're answering that question.
Yeah, that's
42,000 people.
That's
Men
insane.
asked. So this is not a boogeyman. This is not a stranger. This is not the Adi person that's on the TV that all the time being caught. It is in our communities. It is in our families. You can't trust your child with anybody. You have to trust your child. You know, you have to trust, and then also you have to know the cues, because sometimes, because of maybe the precedents that we set in our households, sometimes it's not even just the fact that we are not open, but sometimes the child feels shame. Maybe that's not due to us, but because of what happened to them, that they are not going to communicate with us. They're not going to tell us, right? Yeah. So being able to read your child, being able to understand if they're more withdrawn, seeing the clues. Like if your child used to be a bubbly, happy, outgoing person that is, you know, welcoming to everyone, and all of a sudden this child is severely detached from one family member or from one gender in general. Or if they are, they used to be just a normal child and they're overly sexual all of a sudden, right? It could go one way or the other. If either the child will be afraid of anyone if it's a girl, maybe the girl might be afraid of any men that, you know, she might be interacting with.
It's very slow though.
Yes.
It's very slow before you even get to anything, all the stuff that you're mentioning. It's very slow.
Yeah.
And when the shock comes down, then the aspect of what you're mentioning comes up. So to notice it might be hard, but just know your child.
Yeah,
basically.
Get to know your child. Create a space where your child can have these conversations with you. In addition, as if you are a parent, please educate yourselves in these kinds of situations of like, what does withdrawal, what does a victim's attitude look like, what does how to notice symptoms in a child, not even just that, but also to teach your children. There was this beautifully done classroom demonstration that I saw. I think it was in India or Pakistan, where this teacher is teaching her students how, like, what's okay to be touched, what's okay not to be touched in your body. If a person comes and shakes your hand, is that okay? Yes. If the person comes to your hand and pats your head, yes. If the person comes to your hand and, like, even the different types of pats, right? So if a person comes and says this, is it okay? Yes. Okay. If the person comes and does doing this for a longer time, is that okay? No. You understand? So, like, kind of walking their child through yes or no, and it's not necessarily this means this, because that might be too traumatic for a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old to understand, right? Just the yes or the no part.
Yeah, I remember Dia was watching this Omar and Hannah show episode, and I thought they did a really good job, and I was really surprised because I don't know if you know, but they're like, oh, you know, what is safe touch? And they made it into like a whole song, and I was like, wow, that's, like, it's super prevalent when you see it on Omar and Hannah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
How? Okay. Well,
there's no good way of pivoting from there. No.
Yeah. But so I think I just want to end it on some constructive steps. You as a therapist, when you have, clients that are like, okay, this is what I'm involved in. I think you had mentioned earlier some stuff that you would tell them. What is like 1 or 2 action items that you usually tell your clients? And you want to say your thought, and then we can go there.
Okay. No, I was also just gonna bring it back a little bit to current events and past events that are in our community that I've noticed and that I wanted to address, just because there is a history of that. Is that one is when the idea of everybody loves their family members, right? And because right now we were talking just for the parents and the victims, and I want to talk to the families that could be family of the perpetrator, right? Just to put it out there, everybody loves their family member. Everybody is protective of their family member, and it's okay to feel protective of your family members. It's okay to love your family members. It's okay to want to defend your family members, but just to a certain degree, making sure you take a step back a little bit, taking the step back to hear the whole situation. And I say this, even, I say this knowing how hard it could be, right? Imagine if it's if your father that's being accused, or your brother that's being accused, or your uncle that's being accused of these things. And I understand the need to come out gangbusters and being like, no, I know my family member, they would never do such and such things.
I think that reminds me of the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he says, help your brother, whether he is the oppressed or he's the oppressor. And you help him, as an oppressor by stopping his oppression. Because, when you are like, okay, this is wrong, then he can start to get help. Yeah. Right? And maybe mend his ways. But if you just let him keep on doing what he's doing, you're buying him a ticket to Jahannam in the Akhirah. Yeah.
And help doesn't always mean, like you said, clapping for the other person. It just means, it could also mean holding them accountable and holding their feet to the fire.
Yeah.
You have to ask that question again.
So like I said, I want to end it on I think there's no good note that you could end this conversation on. And, we are not saying this is the end all be all conversation about this. We just wanted to get the conversation going and at least start it somewhere. And we want people to continue in the comments and have conversations like this with your friends, if you have kids, and just being super hyper vigilant about it. But I wanted to just say, what is 1 or 2 things that you usually tell your clients who say, okay, this is the situation I find myself in, or it's happened to me before, or anything like that? Just I don't know if you can even boil it down to 1 or 2 things.
No, I don't tell them anything.
Okay.
I really don't. But I do make them the space that feels safe enough that their story and their truth are being heard and being noticed, and they feel validated for their experiences, for their own truth. Because there have been many people before they came to me that they try to tell the story. And there has been so many people before they came to me where they felt questioned, judged, shamed, being all has been filtered for them. But my job is to always create a safe space for people and not be judgmental in any aspect of it. And so I don't know, for me, I, as a therapist, as a human being, as someone who believes in Allah and want to make sure that, you know, that person's feeling taken care of, I just create safe space for them.
Okay. So just create safe space for people and believe them. You know, when somebody comes you with a situation like this, just give them the space to just talk and listen without any bias, without, you know, saying, have you tried this? Have you done this? Have you done this?
Definitely don't solve it.
Yeah. Just close your mouth and listen.
Yep.
And with that, we'll leave you with this heavy, heavy conversation. This has been
difficult conversations. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.